Okay, if you could please take your seats. Is that working? Hello? Yeah, that works.
Testing,
okay, we are about
testing.
to kick off with solidarity, not solutionism. Fantastic. I don't know why that was funny. Are you laughing at me? Okay. I'm not sure I believe you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to kick off now with solidarity, not solutionism, and I am going to pass over to Becky Kazansky to introduce this panel.
Thank you so much. So my name is Becky Kazansky, and I am here today as part of a really great group of people who are mostly joining us from all sorts of different geographic regions of the world. Hello. I'm going to be awkwardly looking up at them in this hybrid format experiment. So please bear with us as we make our playful time of this this really great way to actually hear from voices from all over today. This panel is kind of a follow-on to a workshop that just happened, which began to explore environmental and climate justice as a digital rights issue. This panel now is going to be focusing on the idea of false solutions for climate and false tech solutions in particular. Just a word about myself. I am here on behalf of an organization called the Engine Room today. It's an international nonprofit organization focused on the responsible and strategic use of data and technology. And joining me as a co-moderator is Shauna Finnegan from the Association of Progressive Communications. We're also excited to welcome 4 panelists based in Chile, Bulgaria, Germany, and here in Brussels with me on stage. First, we have Paz Peña, an independent activist and researcher, and with the Latin American Institute for Terraforming. Lily Fur is joining us from the Center for International Environmental Law. Plamen Piv of Blue Link Bulgaria is also here with us, and Narmeen Abu Bukhari from the EU Greens. They will introduce their work and how they've come to this discussion of environmental justice very briefly. But first, we just want to thank IDRI and Privacy Camp for hosting this conversation because it's part of an effort to think about how we can center climate and environmental issues in digital rights discussions. So in terms of this workshop that I just came out of, what we saw there is that environmental justice and climate justice intersect with digital rights issues in a number of different ways. One key point is on surveillance and security of movements and land rights defenders who are put into harm's way and are dealing with safety concerns as they arise through digital means. There's also a concern with information and disinformation, which connects digital rights and climate justice concerns. And there's also a common shared concern around the extractive nature of corporate technology practices. And in Europe, we see this clear interlinking happening with the discourse around the twin transition, which is the idea that sustainability can be supported through digitization and digital innovation, something which Narmeen also touched on just before our panel. The question is it always true that sustainability and digitization are mutually supporting? There is a lot to unpack there with this idea. And it's a question that seems fit for the digital rights communities around the world to take stock of. The digital rights community is, of course, very familiar with the need to be critical about what kind of innovation gets supported and invested into. But Shauna and I and the rest of the panelists here today believe there's a lot we can also learn from the climate justice movement on how to resist solutionism as a common concern. So on this panel, we're calling out techno-solutionism at the intersection of these different issues. And we're taking inspiration from a framing that the climate justice movement uses, which is false climate solutions. Technologies and narratives that can distract from the problem we're trying to solve and potentially even make it worse. We're asking, what are the false solutions that the digital rights sphere needs to be aware of? And we're also asking, what are some of the just pathways that already exist and which we can wayfind together in order to solve climate and environmental crises? So just a little note on the hybrid format today. We encourage the audience here, as well as online, to use the hashtag PrivacyCamp23 to share reflections and questions with us throughout the panel. There will be a time to discuss those at the end. And you can also join Shauna online through their Twitter handle. Shauna, can you hold that up for us?
Sorry, Becky, I forgot to make the sign, but I'm gonna do it right now.
Okay, the Twitter handle is Shauna Finnegan, and Shauna will momentarily share it with us. So Shauna's gonna create a Twitter thread that people can respond to if you're interested. So now I want to hand it over to give proper self-introductions from all of our panelists. And let's see, the first person I will ask is Shauna, if that's okay with you. Shauna, how did you come to this discussion of digital rights and environmental and climate justice?
Thanks, Becky. I made the sign very quickly for anyone who can possibly read this terrible writing here. Yeah, that's the name. And I'm gonna just put a Twitter thread in the one that Andrea has just created. Because yeah, I'm really excited to hear what's bringing everyone in the audience and participating online to this conversation. As Becky said, this has been a conversation that's been happening for some time, and we really want it to be something that continues well beyond just this moment that we're having today at Privacy Camp. As Becky said, I work with the Association for Progressive Communications, which is an international network of civil society organizations that are really dedicated to supporting individuals and groups to use technology for care for ourselves, each other, and the planet. And environmental justice and sustainability really is at the heart of APC since APC was founded in 1990. However, there's been really a renewed focus on environmental justice in the last few years, including a publication called the Global Information Society Watch, GISWatch, that published an edition in 2021, really focusing on this issue. And I know for myself, it was incredibly valuable to see just these really grounded perspectives of what was happening with APC members and allies and communities that APC Network is working with in terms of the real impacts of the climate crises and the ways that digital technologies are very much intersecting with these crises. So as part of that work, APC has also been looking at ways in which we can support environmental justice movements and land defenders. And this conversation around false solutions has come up time and again. And I think we're really looking to how can we resist those false solutions and what are the opportunities to, as Becky said, wayfind those just pathways. So that's part of what brings me to this conversation, and I'm really excited to hear from the other speakers. So I'll pass back to you first, Becky, in case there's anything else you want to add.
No, thank you so much, Shauna. In that case, Narmeen, if I can pass it to you. Narmeen, how did you come to this intersection of issues? And tell us a little bit about what you work on.
So I work for the Greens at the European Parliament, so for elected representative. I was first a data protection legal counsel before, so I really focused on basically data protection. And then after that, I worked for a consultancy agency, really focusing on sustainability and tech, as much as data protection. And I've realized that the question of sustainability was mainly taken into account by companies, but because the climate movement was influencing the discussion, so they were extremely scared of the legislative steps that was taking place in Brussels. And then I changed job and worked for the Greens, where I was the digital rights campaigner, and I work on digital rights as much as climate issues. And this is where my work really focused on right to repair, circular economy, but also environmental impact of different type of technologies. And this is where also it was more of an activism role that I had, because as a campaigner, obviously, I campaign on behalf of the Greens for a better solution for our tech infrastructures and products. Voilà. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Next, I'd love to hear from Paz. Paz, can you hear me
Hi,
okay?
everyone. Yes, I can hear
Hello.
you. Hello, everyone. My name is Paz Peña, and I live in Santiago of Chile. I work as a freelance consultant, and for the last, I will say 5 years, I have been researching the intersections between digital technology and the climate and environmental crisis. And I'm particularly interested in the social environmental conflicts of digitization and its geopolitical effects, especially in Latin America. In this sense, I work on the, on the exploitation of nature by digitization, as well as the displacement and socio-environmental impacts experienced by indigenous populations and, of course, the working class. So my special interest in the issue of false solution has to do not only with the systemic effects of digitization in the increase of consumption and energy use, but also with how these supposed solutions are built at the cost of the lives of human and non-humans in a particular situation of vulnerability, no? So in other words, what are the communities paying the price of digitization as a solution for the climate and the environmental crisis? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paz. Plamen, tell us about your work, please.
Hello, I'm Plamen Pev, and I'm working for the Ruling Foundation, Bulgaria. But as we are a global foundation, in many aspects, in terms of our interest mostly, I'm based in Estonia, and I'm environmental lawyer for more than 20 years. And we have been working with APC and also with other organizations on the network, internet governance, but also networking with environmental and social rights and other human rights activists, so that we could bring together all the perspectives where it comes to the point when we need to move forward with the technical solutions, and then also the impacts of these solutions across various fields. My perspective has been, in a way, limited to the environmental field for many years, but since we have been working with APC on different issues, especially on the intersection between digital and environmental rights and the possible potential for exploring the potential for their mutual reinforcement. That brought me a bit further out of this silo of environmental protection work in terms of law policies and also people behind, and to see how we could mutually support with tools, with experience, with the stories we have been through in our work. So there's a lot of to learn from each other, and there's a lot we don't know about each other. So it has been really maybe at the beginning of the journey, at least for me, because in the past years I have learned not much, but I'm trying to learn much more so that we could help each other and find ways, because there are many challenges, even with the good solutions related to the climate change, with the, for example, European Green Deal and just transition there are many social and other issues, technological mostly also, which should be considered. So there is a lot of debate and a lot of playing field in this regard. So I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Plamen, and we'll hear more about specifically what kinds of frameworks and just pathways you're looking at. And very last, but very not least, Lily, please tell us about your work.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lily Four. I'm joining from Berlin, Germany, and I work with the Center for International Environmental Law, an international NGO that works at the intersection of the environment and human rights. I'm not a lawyer, I should say. Many people expect that I'm a lawyer. We have many lawyers. I'm not one of them. I've only been with Ciel for the last half year. And I think a lot of what I've done before then also brings me to this conversation today. For 16 years, I worked for the German Green Heinrich Böll Foundation on international environmental policies, focusing very much at the intersection of the environment and new and emerging disruptive technologies. And I've also been sitting on the board of an NGO that is very instrumental in the social movement space on this topic, the ETC group, or etc. group, that monitors new and emerging technologies in this space. And I can the streams that you've already mentioned, Becky, that came out of your workshop very much resonate with sort of the way that I've been looking at this topic and where I'm coming from, the surveillance, the extractive nature of corporate practices. But in addition, so I've always been interested at this intersection of, where basically powerful corporate interests on the side of big polluters, fossil fuel industries, big agriculture on the one hand, and then big tech and big data, where they collide, or where they come together and intersect. And maybe the other few things just to mention where that concern my work, where that is happening, is really where big tech companies and entrepreneurs with that tech solutionist mindset begin to implement so-called solutions to the climate crisis. For example, geoengineering, which I hope we can speak more about later. And yeah, also very much the impact of the environmental impact of these technologies, as Paz has mentioned, their massive energy consumption, I think, leads to a big colliding of interests. And then one other thing that I just wanted to flag, because I think that's something that I've worked on for a long time, but that's not very much at the forefront of this discussion, is where big companies in the agriculture space are beginning to really go for a big data grab, to grab what is now called digital sequence information, so digitalized information about genetics of plants and species, to really exploit them for their private profits. It's a huge topic that is also being discussed at the UN level. I think it's something to explore much more from a digital rights perspective, and a question of how we deal with big data. So yeah, very happy to be here, and there's lots to discuss.
Thank you very much, Lily, and we appreciate your perspective on climate technologies, because the folks in this room and in the digital rights space, we're accustomed to focusing on digital technologies, and now thinking about their intersections with climate and environment. There's also, of course, a long history of climate technology. There's a UN mechanism for transfer of technology and the exploration of carbon capture and geoengineering. So we're really eager to hear more about that history and your perspective on how these discussions and investments have changed over the years. So with those introductions, I now want to move us to the first part of this discussion. The first part of the discussion that we're going to have together is around calling out false climate solutions and thinking about what these actually are in relation to digital rights concerns. And then after that, Shauna is going to take us through thinking about these just pathways. So just to come back to what do we mean by a false solution, and why is this relevant for digital rights folks? One example that has come up a lot in our discussions so far is around carbon offsetting. So carbon offsetting is a practice that first arose in 1988 as part of what's called the voluntary carbon market. And it's a way to, for institutions, companies, and also individuals to think about their carbon consumption and try to compensate for it, either by through afforestation efforts, such as planting trees or restoring ecosystems. And over the decades, it's become a less popular idea and a more popular idea, also tool and technology. We can think of it as a climate technology as well. What's interesting is at the moment, there's a lot of renewed interest in carbon offsetting. And when it comes to the digital rights space, this is where I'd like to tie it back to some research that we at the Engine Room worked on for the last year and a half. What we did together in our organization was a research project exploring intersections between climate justice and digital rights. And as part of this, we looked at corporate tech practices for both big tech corporations and smaller players also in the commercial space. And what we saw often is that there are very expansive pledges made by companies around climate and sustainability targets, but not a lot of information about what's actually happening behind these pledges. What we do know is that one of the most common tools that is used to kind of achieve net zero, so to speak, is carbon offsetting. Other tools include renewable energy credits, and also discussions of infrastructural efficiency, et cetera. But carbon offsets, this is what we think is a false solution. It's been called out by the climate justice movement for decades. More recently, we also have increased empirical evidence. For example, a study came out last week, or an investigation rather, which collected a number of studies and also pulled in new evidence, which showed that at least 95% of carbon offsets in the end do nothing to offset carbon emissions. These projects often fail. And beyond the failure of individual projects, there's also the larger problem of this idea that it's okay to do harm in one side of the, or one part of the world if you compensate for it in another part. It turns out that ecology and the ecosystem doesn't work that way. It's not a balance sheet where you can just, balance the budget and everything will be okay. That really calls a lot into question about big tech, and it makes us ask, as a group of people, practitioners exploring intersections of climate and digital rights, what does that mean for digital rights advocacy and efforts to already try to hold companies accountable? Is this concern with climate pledges something that should be integrated with concern around other kinds of digital rights harms? So with that provocation, I now want to move to Lily, and to ask Lily to reflect a bit about this history of climate technology and what it brings us to today. What should digital rights folks be aware of as the space becomes increasingly involved on sustainability and climate issues? Lily?
Thank you. And thank you for that provocation. That was already great. So I thought what I could offer is looking back at, by now it's 30 years basically of international climate policy making, looking a little bit back at the different turns that we've taken along the way that have led us down a lot of wrong paths. And that have increasingly narrowed down our thinking to just a few options, basically ruling out other alternative options and pathways that we could have taken. Because I do think, I really want everyone to keep that in mind, that when we talk about solutions, the key question is really, what is the problem we're trying to address, right? Depending on how we define a problem, the kinds of solutions that we're going to look for are going to look different. People, with a techno-fix mindset usually come with a solution and then they look for a problem to solve. Let's do it the other way around. Let's look for what is the problem and then, what's the solution? And looking back, really two of the driving forces along the entire pathway of false solutions in the last 30 years have been the belief in endless economic growth on a finite planet, followed by neoliberal capitalism, basically, and then also this techno optimism and the belief that technologies can fix anything and innovation will be the solution. And so along just outlining a few of those turns where we have maybe taken the wrong turn. When in 1992, the world agreed on the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, right, the UNFCCC, we decided, collectively, people in that convention back then, that the climate problem was going to be framed as one about emissions in the atmosphere, something very abstract, not to do with people's life. It's somewhere up there, a thing you cannot touch. It's emissions. And the solution was going to be emission reductions. Well, we could have decided the problem was the fossil fuels in the ground that we were burning, and the forests that we were cutting down. That's not what we decided. The problem was emission reductions. And then came the Kyoto Protocol, which, decided on some first concrete, very small, but targeted measures to actually reduce emissions for a few countries, the rich countries. And what we decided then was that 1 ton of carbon that is emitted when you burn coal, for example, or oil or gas, is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon that is sequestered in a tree or an ecosystem or soil. That is actually very flawed because they're very different carbon cycles. You can ask an ecologist, a biologist, they will explain because those cycles have different timelines. And so it does matter a lot. Also, the geographical location matters. The question whether you're locking in a coal mine or cutting out an entire forest matters. So 1 ton of carbon does not equal 1 ton of carbon, but that is the very basis of carbon trading, which was then created as a mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. And I think what resonates with a sort of big tech's mindset is that we need to quantify and measure everything. And that is something that very strongly resonated with the climate conversation back then and still today. And the next big step, I think, came sort of turning point, and we're still in the middle of that curve, came with the Paris Climate Agreement after 2015, where we now are talking not just about emission reductions, we're talking about net zero, we're talking about negative emissions, we're talking about the idea that we can actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere by some magical technologies that are going to do carbon removal for us. That is something that, by the way, big tech companies like Microsoft are heavily investing in, and they're counting on offsetting their big footprint of emissions by investing in so-called removal technologies, which are highly problematic technologies. And by the way, the European Commission has just proposed a new framework to certify so-called carbon removals from the land sector, but also from so-called carbon capture and storage and other big technologies, to actually build a voluntary carbon market around these removals at the EU level, which is highly problematic. So that's the next big turn that we're taking. And then there is another one looming on the horizon that we're very concerned about, and that has to do with a technology called solar geoengineering. It's actually a suite of technologies, it's not one, but the idea is that maybe, the whole thing about dealing with carbon is too complicated. There's a, easier, cheap way that we can fix the climate problem by addressing some of the symptoms of climate change, by turning down the temperature, by taking control of the global thermostat and basically turning it down to whatever we want, 1.5 degree, who wants less, let's see. So managing so-called radiative forcing, managing the level of sunlight that reaches Earth. And there are a number of technologies being researched, and increasingly they're moving into outdoor experiments. Big tech is very interested. This field is full of Silicon Valley startup sort of idealists or optimists who want to go for it. And actually just a few weeks ago, a Silicon Valley startup firm called Make Sunsets announced that they did the first rogue, so unauthorized solar geoengineering experiments in Mexico just in April last year. It just was announced that they did it at the end of last year. The Mexican government now announced to ban it, but which is the right decision, I think. But anyway, so the idea that we should get rid of or in addition to the carbon metric that is really dominating climate policy, actually introduce a new metric of radiative forcing is something that resonates strongly with the big tech sector. Make sunsets. It was already beginning to sell so-called cooling credits instead of carbon offsets. You can have cooling offsets. So that opens the door widely to a whole sweep of not just false solutions, but sort of risky technologies that have the potential to destroy entire climate systems, including things like the monsoon, which millions of people depend on for their livelihoods and their lives. All of that is quite scary, and I do hope that we can form and create new alliances between the digital rights movement and the climate justice movement. So I'm very glad we're beginning to have this conversation today here and in many other spaces.
Thank you so much, Lily. I think I noted some reactions from the audience. This idea that the main metric around climate change would now be how much sunlight hits the Earth. It's kind of, where do you go from there if that becomes the main solution that we're banking on? And is it even possible to, or feasible for the kind of global cooperation required to make geoengineering have this desired effect? And if that does get put into place, is there kind of a lock-in then for the mid to long-term future and a reliance on just having less sunlight going forward? So that feels quite fundamental. Thank you so much. Now we want to ask Paz to reflect on techno-capitalism and kind of challenging this idea of the twin transition that I introduced as being an important part of approaches to innovation at the moment in the EU and beyond. Paz.
Thank you, Becky. Yes, I want to introduce the idea of techno-capitalism instead of talking only about big techs, in the understanding that although big tech is a great example of techno-capitalism, I believe that it is the techno-capitalist ideology, also adopted as hegemonic logic by most digital developments, including the developments made by the states, that must be fought as a solution to the climate and the ecological crisis. Basically because, as Mel Hogan says, techno-capitalism implies big data ecologies, no? So for example, the creation of an infrastructure generally placed in foreign territories, specially conditioned to infinite growth with intensive exploitation of natural resources to operate. If everything is subject of datafication, digital infrastructures become more intensive in their consumption of course, natural resources. And that intensive infrastructure in all its life cycle affects human and non-human communities, which tend to be, of course, the bodies that matter the least to capitalism. So this is why the false solution of the so-called twin transition is dangerous, primarily as understood by the European Commission, where the competitiveness of Europe is in the global economy is by far the first priority, and where the complementary transitions are more near of a geopolitical idea than an actual scientific truth. One, because due to the indirect effects of techno-capitalist digitization, we will likely have a digital rebound effect in many industries. So it is, at least it's strange to seriously believe that they are complementary transitions when conclusive evidence is still lacking, no? But more importantly, to say that they are twin transitions is to accept that both green energies and digital technologies are the industries where the control of the world economy is being played out between China, the United States, and the European Union. Thus, the twin transition concept is an economical concept more than a green solution, no, to the crisis. But I want to return to the issue of techno-capitalism as the logic to be suspected as an approach to the climate crisis, not only looking at how big tech is portraying itself as a friend of the environment, but also at initiatives that have much better press in terms of green techs, but that continues with techno-capitalist logics. And here, taking advance to the fact that I'm in a European forum, I want to bring Fairphone into the discussion. In their last book, Adi Kunzman and Esperanza Miyake do a fascinating analysis of the images of the Fairphone website, where magically the white bodies are the ones that repair, and the colored bodies are the ones working in mines. But of course, not any mines, socially responsible mines, according to the company. By the way, Fairphone is holding a series of conversations here in Chile to see sustainable lithium extraction methods. But this green tech company, instead of first coordinated a conversation, for example, with the indigenous communities affected by this extraction, choose to ally with large German companies of electric vehicles, that is, the big capital that today is part of a severe social environmental crisis here at the Salar of Atacama in the north of Chile. So if you think it, it's like teaming up with Google to see a sustainable way to exploit personal data. So Eric Kunzman and Esperanza Miyake state, and I strongly agree, that we cannot reduce a social justice problem to a feel-good consumption practice of European customers. This, I think, might give us a clue where we need to go in alternatives to techno-capitalism as a response to the climate and the ecological crisis. I don't want to extend any further, but I leave the conversation open for further collective reflection. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paz, for calling our attention to the contradictions of what we might consider to be even a green or responsible technology. I think it shows that there's always a way to go, and that part of that is acknowledging the continued extractivism that comes into play, even with the devices that we might feel better about. And not to end it on a depressing note, we are going to also explore just pathways now. But before I hand it over to Shauna, I just want to invite the online audience, if you want to engage with us on this question of what is a false solution, please feel free to tweet the hashtag #NoFalseSolutions. And now I want to hand it over to Shauna.
Thanks so much. And yeah, thanks so much for those interventions, Lily and Paz. I think it's really useful to really frame our understanding as well in terms of just pathways. When we can identify what are false solutions, I think we have a much clearer idea of where there are real opportunities, and really learning from communities and peoples who have been doing this work for centuries, for millennia. I live in the prairies of so-called Canada, and here in Canada and in the US, Indigenous peoples and traditional communities have been on the front lines of defending ecosystems, defending the rights of nature. Recent research suggests that 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is located on lands inhabited by Indigenous peoples. Although that only makes up 20% of the world's territories, it's very indicative of the fact that Indigenous peoples and traditional communities have been doing this work for so long. And actually, over the past decade, there's research to show that Indigenous communities, specifically in US and Canada, who are resisting fossil fuel projects, have stopped or delayed greenhouse gas pollution equivalent to at least 25% of the annual US and Canadian emissions, which is huge. And there is a growing recognition, and I think we do need to really be pushing our representatives in different government spaces to be moving this forward. Here in Canada, the government has just started to develop a Guardians project. There's more work to support Indigenous nations in setting up protected and conservation areas. But unfortunately, that relationship doesn't often come as a kind of nation-to-nation partnership. It's often still a very, legacy of colonialism in terms of the ways in which the Canadian government is approaching the relationship with Indigenous nations. So I think it's important to think about how we as digital rights actors can really be supporting and acting in solidarity with these movements, with land and territory defenders who really understand the ecosystems far better than anyone who's just swooping in and hoping to, set up a carbon offset scheme. And so just with that very brief framing, I want to really now turn the mic to Plum to reflect on some of the ways in which environmental and internet governance have started to really find these intersections and some of the opportunities for collaboration. Plum, over to you.
Thank you, Shauna. First of all, I want to just come back to this reference point I was making when I presented myself and my background, that the environmental rights and environmental justice, and now climate justice, if we take it more broadly, it has been around for many years, more than 50 years, and have been developing as a tool, a democratic tool of influencing the development of society, development of industrial solutions. And this history and the lessons and the collected knowledge, but also experience in the field of environmental protection by the environmental activists, it's really very important, because there is obviously new era, new stage of this struggle between the economic industry interests and also the interests of people to live in healthy environment, to live in their places where they could have a clean air, water, soil, and have rich biodiversity. So in a way, environmental rights have been really enabling people to defend their land, their livelihood, and in a way, it was a powerful tool in the hands of the weak part of the society, because otherwise, industry itself, wouldn't be self-regulating itself in a way that it will really produce a positive change, taking into account of the public interest. So coming back to the public interest, I think it's a good reference and cross-reference point about to understand how the digital and the environmental rights could intersect. And I want just to present you the example of the Aarhus Convention, which has become recently also global legal instrument, otherwise was covering the countries of Europe and Central Asia, but now it's every country could be part of the convention. So this Aarhus Convention has enabled through its three pillars: access to information, public participation, and access to justice in environmental matters, enabled all the NGOs, activists, and just the general public in the countries parties to the convention to have a stronger and more powerful way to control, to monitor, or to resist in a way to the overexploitation of natural resources, to be part of the discussion and also decision-making process, where the governmental authorities decide whether one or another project will be approved or not. So this convention has become really a very strong safeguard for nature, and also a benchmark for environmental democracy, because it also links the environmental and human rights, and also acknowledges that the fact that we owe an obligation to the future generations, and also establishes that the sustainable development should be achieved only through the involvement of all stakeholders. It has influenced really the policy making and also the thinking in a way of the decision making process, also at business level in many countries, because, for example, Bulgaria is part of the convention. European Union as a union is part of the convention, although not perfect member, I should say. So in a way, this international law over imposing these new rules for procedural rights has been changing the landscape of the democracy at national level. So this is a really powerful instrument which could be and the lessons for more than 20 years of history of implementing of this convention has been could be really important reference point for any conversation related to how we could approach and understand and in a way be involved into the decision making processes related also to the improvement of the introduction of new technologies, which might be digital or other technologies which haven't been regulated yet. But anyway, the environmental law is protecting and ensuring decision-making processes to be democratic and inclusive, so that we could really regulate and be involved into the decision making for the development of different infrastructural projects, influencing the life of everyone. So the same way, I think all the new infrastructure, digital and other infrastructure of new generation would be also would need also this really all-inclusive element of decision-making process and openness, really full access to information, public participation, and eventually, as much as possible, under the different nation frameworks, legal frameworks, access to justice, and also challenging different decisions, and also challenging, in the best case, also the business in the core. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Plamen. I really appreciate also your reflection on the ways in which the Aarhus Convention has really sort of shifted thinking around these issues. And I think that's really valuable to think about how we resist false narratives. And again, as you said, the opportunities to really use this mechanism to really address that gap, as we see there's clearly a concern among, the majority of people living on this planet about the climate crises. And it's really the people who are in power who are refusing to act. So thanks so much, Plamen. I think that's a really valuable example. So I want to now turn back to the on ground in Brussels to hear from Narmeen to reflect a little bit on what's happening at the EU level. Narmeen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to shed a bit of light on how actually companies publish on their website their environmental impact. You would see on Google, for instance, they will tell you how the data center is climate neutral. And this is actually an environmental claims. And 57% of EU consumers are receptive to these environmental claims when they buy or use any services or buy a product. And in certain countries, they are even more receptive, for instance, Sweden or Denmark. What does it mean? It means that we have companies using a marketing strategy to showcasing how well they are, how well their environmental footprint is, regardless of how reliable that information could be. And because it's self-awarded by the manufacturers or the person providing the service or the products, we have a lack of trust from consumers, because you can have a label or a claim that is actually real and has been justified, and others which are unreliable, super vague, or even wrong sometimes. And because consumers like that type of information, they are being confused. A Spanish consumer organization have even shown that more than 43% of people do not trust anymore the environmental claims on products. So we have a situation where people do care about how they consume, how what they buy, and the response that companies are providing to us consumers. And this greenwashing is also misleading other economical actors. So it's not even giving the advantage due to the people making the effort to green the product and their activities. And ultimately, that leads obviously to a less green economy. I'm talking about this because I think it's a really good example on how we can create a better environment for our infrastructures and our products. The European Union, the European legislation exists on this matter, but it's mainly on the information that a company is supposed to give to the consumer. And there are two legislative texts that provide, that gives a legal basis to this. One of them is the Consumer Rights Directive, and the other one is the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive. And both of them oblige the manufacturers to actually give the information, but also forbids any misleading omission of information. Now we still have a problem because a product can still enter the market without being justified. And that would mean that you would have to bring a complaint to the table, and that will take ages, and the product will still be on the market while it's misleading us. So finally, we know that there is no obligation to provide any information on the environmental aspect of it. So you can't really ban a green claim. And that is really the problem. And this is why we believe as Greens that it's really important to regulate those claims and ensure that you don't have companies claiming what they are not, claiming things that they are actually not doing. Recently, in December 2019, so at the very beginning of the mandate, the European Commission put forward a European Green Deal. And this is a strategy that aims at greening pretty much a lot of topics like mobility, food, housing, and even the financing sector. But they decided early in 2020 to finally tackle the problem on greenwashing. They first published in 2022, they published a proposal on empowering the consumers in the green transition. And the aim was really to create an environment where you could publish trustworthy information on how eco-friendly a product is and give a consumer a better role or a bigger role. Little disclaimer, I don't believe that the burden should be put on the consumer. This is not how the ecological transition should be done. But creating trustworthy information obliges the manufacturers to stop producing products, infrastructure that goes against the ecological transition. And this is an economic way, and that is this, you can discuss whether we should use this way, but that brings actually a way to fine company for providing information that is wrong. Now, what is interesting into that text is that it will pre-approve any claims that a company will put into the market, and that would have to be done by a national body. And I think it would enable to avoid products to come to the market and actually have no impact on our society. Positive impact on our society. The second thing is that it will provide more information on the durability, the repairability of a product. And it would also ban, and that I found super interesting, the environmental claims. So every claim like, sustainability, eco-friendly, climate neutral, all those words would have to be proven that would have to be actually backed up by scientists and a performance and indicator developed by the Commission. So then the question is, will that indicator be good enough? And that I actually don't know. But it's better that at least we have an institutionalized way of looking into what companies will be able to claim or put on their website or put on their products or what type of label they will be using. In a nutshell, I think this new proposal would really help us European consumers have a better impact on the planet, but also that would oblige manufacturers to really respect what they're actually saying. And this could be really inspiring not only from a consumer perspective, but for more general services that we have, and apply to digital services that you would have to use, because this is really linked to products that you're buying, not services. So we could extend potentially this legislation to other ways. And finally have better information for consumers, for manufacturers, and for any economic players that is going to enter the market, and not undermine the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narmeen. That's really valuable to hear about these developments. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about some of the reflections that Louis, you shared about changing metrics, and thinking about some of the metrics that you mentioned, Narmeen, for example, durability and repairability. And, one of the questions I thought was, is this something because of some of the, right to repair campaigns that have happened in Europe that these metrics have gotten more prominence? And just thinking again about those performance indicators and your note, Narmeen, about their effectiveness, it seems like there's really a lot more conversation needed to be had around indicators and metrics, and how we really understand this movement towards a just transition, thinking about the ways in which the pathways have really narrowed over the last decade. So yeah, thank you so much, Narmeen. And before I pass back to start asking some questions, I do want to just also invite anyone who's on Twitter, if you want to share some examples that you know of actions that are really contributing to just pathways for climate justice and sustainability. It'd be great to hear from you. Back to you, Becky.
Thanks so much, Shauna, and also Narmeen, for your intervention. This actually brings us to opening the floor to questions, both from the audience here and online. So yes, does anyone have a question they'd like to pose to the panelists? And maybe we can pass the microphone over then. I see one hand up over here.
Hi, I'm Jonas from the Freie Universität of Brussels, a communication researcher working on data protection impact assessments. So actually it reminded me quite a bit. I've been learning a lot from environmental impact assessments when we were conceptualizing, especially the involvement of citizens in these impact assessments. So I'm very interested in the links between the digital rights and more environmental rights. But my question, where I really thought what you were talking about linked to the digital rights movement was enforcement. So some of the ideas that you've been just presenting about like greenwashing or forecoming greenwashing, how, well, seeing, for example, the GDPR, how difficult it can be to enforce these rules. How, isn't it extremely, wouldn't it, it sounds extremely complicated to enforce, for example, what companies write on their products to inform the consumer. So how realistic is that in practice, that these rules are actually being enforced, followed and enforced?
Narmeen, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, sure. I think just like for the GDPR, it would be national authority. Then you would have the question of, would you really like to have consumer authority to organize this, or do we prefer to have competitive authority? I mean, I think that was the same question that took place for GDPR. Frankly, it's I found really difficult to know if a consumer organization would be better than a competition organization. But since it's a consumer directive, I mean, both of them are, it would make more sense than they are the one following this topic. I mean, precisely on the unfair practice directive, that's the case. Then remains another question: what is the financial mean that you would like as member states to provide to these authorities? This is a political will question. It's each national member states taking it seriously and putting the money into the national authorities. So I would really frankly answer that the consumer organization should be in charge of this. And we will see if that will take in place. But then the methodology should be one that is made by the European Commission, so that you have a normalized methodology beforehand that could be used by every national authorities later. I hope it really answers your question.
I see another hand up. Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Maximilian. I'm part of Degrowth Belgium. And thanks a lot for all of your interventions. My question would go to Lily and Paz. We heard you sketching problems, but I would also like for you to have the opportunity to sketch a just pathway and a way out of techno-capitalism. So how do we change? How do we challenge it? And what paths should international climate policy take? You spoke about paths not being taken. Lily, maybe you have an idea of which one to follow. Thanks a lot.
Do you want me to take this immediately?
Yeah.
Okay. So I do not have a grand master plan to offer, to make that clear, because I'm skeptical that what we need is a big master plan, but that's maybe not what you're asking. I think there's so many things we could and should be doing, but if I just name a few, it's really phasing out fossil fuels as fast and as completely as possible, starting yesterday. And that is not what we're doing at this point. And we're doing so many things that are counterproductive to that urgent and necessary phasing out of fossil fuels, including, greenwashing in the form of, calling new investments in fossil gas infrastructure clean. So phasing out fossil fuels, and then also stopping the destruction of ecosystems that are still standing and allowing those already destroyed to be restored is a key one, transforming our industrial agriculture system into something that's more just and sustainable and based around agroecology, for example, and diverse models. So there are many, many different things. I was just listening to the conversation, reflecting myself on what are the parts where I see the solution paths or ways forward where the digital rights movement and the climate justice movement intersect and could really be working together. Just want to name two that really come to the forefront for me. One is really that the climate justice movement knows how to tackle the fossil fuel industry and lobby, right? That's what the climate justice movement is good at. That part of the movement does not really get the mindsets of big tech and Silicon Valley and how these companies operate and how we can tackle them. And I think that is what many of you, I can't see you in the audience, but I believe you know much better, or that part of the movement knows much better. So I'm inviting all of you to join the fight against geoengineering and the big techno fixes, because we need that knowledge and we need those synergies. The other thing, connecting it back to the issue of surveillance and shrinking spaces that apparently was discussed in a workshop. We're extremely concerned about the next climate conference happening in the UAE, a country where digital surveillance is very, very strong. Human rights are not protected at all. We already saw what happened at the last conference of parties in Egypt. The good news was the climate and the human rights movement were beginning to work together and actually have joint communications at that last conference of parties. Not sure how that's going to play out at the COP in the UAE, but I do think that the climate justice movement at the COP needs much more support from digital rights activists, both in terms of concrete analysis of, apps that are being offered to participants of the conference, whether they're safe or not, ways of communicating safely while on the ground, etc., but also actually understanding the political context of the country that this movement is going to come to for that big UN conference. So those are two concrete things that I'm hoping spark some interest in your movement.
Well, I have three ideas. The first one, especially thinking about what we have said before here with panelists, is to understand that this is a planetary issue. So whatever is happening in Europe, for example, any measure that you take in Europe is going to affect the rest of the world. And in this regard, I really, my call is actually to think about what are the measures that Europe is taking around this, especially around this greenwashing thing, etc., and how that is going to impact the rest of the world, because this is capitalism, and capitalism is going to look for other place to extract resources, data, etc. No? And I think that is something that we need today urgently address to understand that this is a planetary issue. And I think that the European Union has a very important role here to think not only about Europe, but open its vision to the rest of the world. That is one thing, especially for Europe. The second thing is probably something that you have discussed a lot as privacy specialists, the idea that we need to limit techno-capitalism, especially when we talk about big techs. Big techs are not a solution for the climate crisis, because this idea of growth and growth and growth, of extractivism of data, that means use of a lot of natural resources, etc. We need to limit techno-capitalism, and I know that is a super complex problem, but we need to move to that direction. And the second thing is that we not only need to reduce the power of techno-capitalism, but also to push public policies to have techno-diversity. And techno-diversity understood as the Chinese philosopher Yu Hui understands techno-diversity. This idea that there are different technologies that can be tied to communities, to their territories, and to their cosmovisions. We are facing today this totalizing idea of techno-capitalism, where every little technology is tied to that growth logic, and we need public policies that can fertilize, the scenario for different logics of technology to appear, because this is, and I want to end up with this, technology will accompany us in this problem, If we want to have solutions, technology will, have a very important role, but not any technology, not techno-capitalism. So we need to urge, our public policies to the public policy, the decision makers, to take public policies that can be actually directed to have a more techno-diversity field in our realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these last reflections and for the wonderful questions from the audience. We are kind of coming on to the end of this discussion today, but we don't want this to be the end of the discussion. And so that being said, I know there might have still been a couple hands up. Please feel free to reach out to us afterwards. And I'm going to pass it over to Shauna now for some clues about next steps and ways to continue to have this talk. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Becky. And for anyone who does use Twitter, we are collecting some resources in that Twitter thread that we've got going. And if you want to, feel free to direct message me at my full name Twitter handle. And so as Becky said, and I think as we keep trying to bring out throughout this conversation, we really want this to be an opening for conversations for people who maybe this is really new, as well as really continuing the work that we're doing with each other and with our wider networks to really address these issues. And so we're working with a coalition that will be hosting some discussions at MozFest at the end of March, which is, I believe, the 20th to the 24th of March. We'll be having a few conversations there, and we're really hoping that this will be part of building coalitions, really connecting climate justice and digital rights. There has been a lot of work happening that around really having digital rights funders really engaging in work towards climate justice and supporting really intersectional research. And we really hope that if you're interested in getting involved, that you'll reach out to those of us who are in the panel and the organizers to really think about how we can continue working together. So I do just want to make sure that if everyone has, if you want to say any final words, the speakers, and then pass back to Becky.
Thank you so much, Shauna. And I also want to express my deep thanks to all of the panelists today who engaged in this hybrid experiment with us. I hope it's been an enriching discussion for you all, and I look forward to continuing it with you. With that, we reach the conclusion. So thank you so much.